more powerful than constraints because you can implement constraints with triggers and you can do a lot more. So in the last class, I gave a couple of examples where we created constraints with using the trigger mechanism. So the first one, so this is the cascaded delete. So when you delete from employee, so you should also delete from the dependent. And similarly, this next one, when you delete on employee, I mean, this was, I kind of updated the dependent. So, so triggers and constraints are little programs that get activated when you insert, delete, or update the database. And these are stored, these are part of the schema. They're part of the DDL, and they will get executed. So I'm going to continue with this with another example. So we have okay, so I'm again going to take the employee table. So we have social security number, name, salary, and department number. And I look at the department table where we have D number. And now I have a new field that we don't have in our company database called total salary. So the idea of this attribute, I mean, what it always contains, it just adds up all the employees who are in the department and just gives you their total salary. So naturally, you don't want a human being to sit there and keep always, counting and adding and putting value so that every time, anytime you insert any new employee, you have to go and update the total salary. Every time you delete, you have to update. Every time you update the employee table, you have to update department. So naturally, you don't want that to be done manually. This is something you want to do through a program, and that's what we do through a trigger. So here I'm going to show you how Oracle does it, because like I mentioned, MySQL does it a bit differently. It doesn't have, Oracle does not have this when condition. And it also doesn't fully, in Oracle, you can do more than MySQL. So I want to do it in Oracle, which kind of is more powerful, and then show you how you can do the same thing with MySQL. So we have so create trigger total salary 1 after insert on employee for each row when new. So new is the new attribute. So when new D number is not null, update department, set DOT total salary is equal to total salary plus new dot salary, where D number okay. So just, I mean, when you read this trigger, you kind of know what it's doing. Every time you insert in the employee table, and when you insert a new row, and it checks whether this new row that you inserted, whether the D number is null or not null. And if it is not null, then you are updating the total salary. You are adding to total salary, and you only add when the D number is equal to this new dot D number. So I hope the meaning of this trigger is clear to everyone. So, the way triggers are implemented is that when you insert in the employee table, before it returns back to you, the user, I mean, before the insert is complete, this whole thing will happen as an atomic action. Then it goes and looks in the department table, and it looks row by row in the department table. So it has to go scan every single row in the department table to see if there is any row where the D number is equal to D number. So when you write out here when new.d number is not null, so if new.d number is null, then you don't have to look in the department table at all. So it kind of, unnecessarily, if D number is null, then there's no point wasting time going through it. So that's what that when statement does. So it's kind of efficient. If null, then the rows of this department table are not checked. Because otherwise you are checking row by row. That's what for each row signifies. So this is the way you do it in Oracle. And like I mentioned before, is that MySQL doesn't have everything in there. So if you wrote the same thing in MySQL, it's going to be written like this. So create trigger after insert on employee. Then you have for each row. Okay, so because you don't have this next line out here when new.d number, that statement is not there in MySQL. So I'm going to leave that line blank out here so that you can see that it's not there. And then we have update department set I just need to kill that window. Okay. I forgot that out here you have new.salary. Okay. So I set total salary is equal plus new.salary, where D number is equal to new.d number. But here, so now you have to do this check that you had out here where D number, new.d number is not null. Now you have to add it out here in your SQL statement. So you would add out here and new.d number is not null. So by adding this new.d number is not null out there, it has the same effect as you have it out here. So if new.d number is null, then you don't even have to look in the department table because you don't have to, update anything out there. So it kind of prevents, wasted work. So does everyone understand any questions on this? So I'm going to do a few more examples. So let's look at this next example. And I'm going to do a similar one. So we have, so again, I'm going to first do it with Oracle. So this was example 3. So we have example 4. So in Oracle, okay, so we have create, trigger. So I'll call it total salary 2. And if you notice, it's going, so this is affecting 2 different tables, employee table and the department table. So the earlier one was inserts, and this time I'm going to do update. So after update of salary on employee for each row when new.d number, I think I don't need this, is not null. And so now I'm going to update. Actually, I'll do this. Update department set Okay, so earlier we were just inserting, but now you are updating salary on employee. So in this case, the total salary, you can't just add the new salary, you have to also minus the old salary. So this one would be plus new dot salary and minus old dot salary. Because if you don't do that, I mean, obviously you're going to have a mistake. So here I'm giving you an example where using both new, which is a new salary that you updated it to, but you also have the old salary in there. And then, so set total salary, okay, where D number is equal to new dot D number. Okay, so this is the, when you update salary on employee, it also updates the salary in department. So now I'm going to do the same thing with MySQL. So we have, so instead of just writing it down, I'm just going to copy it down. So just so that way it's easier to show the difference between. Okay. So I'm going to show how it differs in MySQL. So we have create, trigger, total salary 2, and after update. So here it states after update of salary on employee. Unfortunately, in MySQL, you can't do that. So you cannot say after, you can't say what you're updating. You can just state after update on employee. So therefore, just like in the previous example, we will have to somehow take care of this part out here. So we're going to have, okay, so after update on employee for each row, and then again, we don't have this when is not there in MySQL, so we don't have that either. So the way you take care of the missing parts is you have to add it on the end. So we say, and old dot d number is equal to new dot d number. So we are stating that old dot d number is equal to new dot d number, so that what you're trying to do is state that the d number was not updated. So that's the reason for putting this down out here. So and you need to do that because we don't have this part it out here. We don't say what was updated. So we need to have this here. And then and new dot salary. And new dot salary is not equal to, oh, I think I'll write it down as, is not equal to old dot salary. Because if new dot salary, that means salary was updated. If it wasn't, there's no reason for doing this. So that's the reason, because salary was updated. So that's why I did this. So that's the difference between writing a trigger. So they both do exactly the same thing. It's just that Oracle's statement is, the trigger statement has got more features. So you have to write less. While here as a programmer, you need to take care of a little more. Any questions so far? Did you understand both these triggers? I mean, the two, this example 4 on total salary.
Isn't this something you might end up doing with a view as well? Like you just create a query to get the sum of salaries across a department?
Yes, but triggers are a lot more powerful than a view because whenever you are inserting, deleting, or updating, it's doing these actions. And in a view is only when someone, so this is there in the database. So there is a field called total salary in the database itself. In a view, it's only when you access something that it will do it. You know, like, so I want to see what total salary is. At that point, it'll generate total salary. But here, total salary is a attribute in the database. And
right, so it depends on what you're trying to do.
yes, yes. So it's different. View is more, for example, just take my courses. You have a different view and I see a different view. The underlying database is something, and the view is generated only when you access it. You know, when you open my courses and look, say at your grades or something, you see it, it generates it at that point. And it doesn't affect the underlying database. So they are actually two different features. I mean, really good, very good features, and they're different features. So triggers are, and another thing is triggers, only system administrators, you have to be an ordinary programmer because this really affects the DDL. So an ordinary programmer does not have permissions to create these triggers and constraints. They are part of the database schema. So this is really done by when the designers, they decide what kind of triggers should be there and what kind of constraints should be there. And if you want to add more later, you know, these are people who have a lot more permission than an ordinary programmer to put in triggers and constraints. They really affect the database. So they're really powerful features. I mean, I'm just showing you a small bit about triggers, but you can do a lot with triggers. You can when you affect one table, you can, you can just, this is called trigger. You can trigger a chain of events. It can trigger a whole bunch of changes in other tables. So I'll try to give a small example with that too. And actually, you should really try this out in the company database. You could change something in employee and have it filter down and change everything in every table in the company database. So it is actually a very powerful feature. So I also want to show, I keep saying before and after. I think most of my examples are doing after update and after. I don't know if I did before in the last class. You might wonder, like, what's the big deal? What's the difference between before and after? So I'm going to show you the meaning with this next example. So So this particular example does not work in MySQL. And so I really tried. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, trying to come out with an example that shows the difference between before and after in MySQL. But because the triggers in MySQL are not as powerful as triggers in other database systems, I couldn't come up with any kind of meaningful example in MySQL. So the example I'm coming up to explain to you the difference between before and after, if you try this in MySQL, it won't run because unfortunately in MySQL, you can't. So for example, if I update an employee, I can't trigger an action in employee itself. I can trigger an action in department. I can trigger an action in any of the other tables. But if I start with the employee table, I cannot trigger the action in the table itself. So I cannot do multiple triggers on the same table. So every table, how do I say it? So let's say I have this trigger total salary 2. This trigger total salary 2 can touch a table only once. It can't touch a table multiple times. So the example that I'm going to show touches a table multiple times, and I couldn't do it in MySQL. So this example will not work. So I do want to make that very clear. I don't want you to try it out and say what's happening. It'll give you an error in MySQL. Okay, so really what I want is that when you enter, so this is the action that I want. I want it to make that there can be a total of only 100 employees in employee. You can never go beyond 100 employees in the employee table. So I cannot have more than 100 employees in there. So this is what I want to enforce. So do not permit greater than 100 employees in the employee table. So I want to do this constraint um, using triggers. So let me show that. And like I said, it doesn't work in MySQL, but it'll work in other databases. So create trigger. Let me call it limit 1. And so here I'm going to use before. So I'm saying before. So, and I'll do it using after too. So this is a before part. Before insert on employee for each row when select count star from employee is equal to 100. And then, so I'm saying is when select count star, I'm saying do not insert. So this is what I really wanted to do is do not insert. So I'll write it down as select raise ignore. And this can only happen in Oracle. This will not work in in Oracle, you would say select race. If you were doing something like this in MySQL, you would have to say insert ignore. But like I said, you can do insert ignore in MySQL, but unfortunately you can't trigger on the same table. So if you look at this, what this is doing is that whenever, so let's say you're inserting into the employee table. So it's a before insert. So what it does is that it does a count. So it'll do a count. So we just suppose I have 99 rows in my employee table, and I have I have to have 100 because I said do not permit greater than 100 employees. So let's say I have 100 employees in the employee table. So then what I'm doing is, so it's before inserting the 100. So I'm trying to insert the 101 employee in the table. So when I type in the row and I do press insert, before it inserts it, it does a count of the old table. So what the original table, it'll do a count. And if it sees that there are 100 people in that, what in Oracle, when you say select race ignore, it means that it's not going to allow you to add this new employee row. It will ignore it. So you can't add it. And if you do it in MySQL, you say insert ignore, which means that it won't insert this 101 row into the table. So that's what this particular trigger does. And if I did this with after, let me just show you if I did it with after. So it would be create trigger limit 2. So now I'm going to do after insert. So after insert employee for each row when select count star from employee is greater than 100. So then I'm going to say delete from employee where SSN is equal to new dot SSN. So I hope this example shows you the difference between the before and after. In the after, it's adding. So let's say there are 100 employees there already, and I'm adding the 101th employee in. So it'll add it in, and then it runs the select count star and sees, okay, the count is greater than 100. So it now deletes the one that I just added. So that's the difference between before and after. And like I said, unfortunately, you can't see it in MySQL because MySQL does not allow you to have the action of the trigger be on the same table. So if you notice, it's on employee, and I'm doing the whole action on employee itself. That MySQL is not allowing. So you can't test this out, but I couldn't come up with a better example to show you the difference between before and after. So I hope you understood the difference between before and after with this example. Okay, so then I'm going to continue with triggers. I just want to show you that with triggers, you can actually write like programs. So you can do actually even a little more than this. You can write a lot more. So far, I've only done one SQL statement pretty much afterwards. But you can write an entire program. You can say, when this action happens, do this. And you can then do actions on multiple tables. So I'm going to do that in the next class. So I'm going to see you on Friday. Does anyone have any questions?